Joe Biden and the Democrats' worst nightmare may be coming. At least their worst nightmare as it pertains to the midterm elections. I'd suppose that Joe Biden's worst nightmare would be like, I don't know, accountability for the weird things he and his son have done. But when it comes to this upcoming November election, Joe Biden fears a railway worker strike. Bloomberg reports, rail strike threat squeezes Biden between unions and economic peril. You see, here's the big challenge. The union has rejected the deal. The Democrats were unable to bring forth something, to negotiate something that would appease the workers, and the strike deadline is fast approaching. If the railroad union strikes, we are looking at an economic loss of about $2 billion per day. At least that's what's being reported at a time when the market's already tanking due to inflation fears, and Joe Biden was celebrating on the White House lawn the Inflation Reduction Act as everything burns down around him. If these union workers strike, your goods will not be delivered, prices will increase, and you will see a major shortage. But here's the big problem for Biden. He's got the economic damage to worry about, and that's going to hit everyone. But if he doesn't get these unions what they want, he's got the union to deal with on top of angry. He's really got to get this deal done, but he can't. All he can do is offer up negotiations, and it didn't work. So perhaps then the end is nigh. Come November, with an economy in very serious jeopardy, people are going to vote Republican. Now, I want to tell you, I don't think this is something Republicans can solve either. It's an issue of people look to whoever's in charge and get angry. And that, to be fair, it ain't all Joe Biden's fault. Joe Biden isn't the private railway companies or anything like that. But let's be real. The policies enacted by the Democrats and Joe Biden have hurt the economy, resulting in these workers needing an increase in pay more than the companies can provide. Everybody is suffering. As Cardi B, famed musician, said, "How are y'all surviving?" And she's right. But you know what, my friends? It is not just the railroad union strike, which is huge news, by the way. Come Friday, we may see economic dire straits. It's also crime. Because the second biggest factor for voters is first is economy, second is crime. And Tucker Carlson the other day was pointing out how even in some of the nicest neighborhoods in this country, you are seeing crime. And of course, Media Matters have come out attacking him. That's right. The left is going after Carlson, saying that he's crazy because the Democrats have nothing. They have smears and they have lies. But this plan on releasing criminals and letting violent criminals roam the streets, it's not working. They go after Tucker Carlson because they're like, he's blaming George Soros. George Soros literally wrote an op-ed saying we need to reform what's going on with these prosecutors. And it's kind of sad because I agree, but just not with this man. I think we do have criminal justice problems, but the way it's being handled is just failing. And it's failing terribly. Now, Illinois is set to enact some kind of, what is it called? The Safety Act. Haha, very funny. Eliminating cash bail for some offenses. We're going to see crime skyrocket. This is Democrats, let's just say, tripping up themselves. I'll keep the rhetoric a little toned down. They're hurting themselves with these policies. So the only thing they can do is try and scream MAGA Republicans over and over again and send the DOJ to go arrest Trump supporters because their policies don't work. They are caught between a rock and a hard place, and it's this simple. You've pandered to your base to the point where you have no choice but to offer them up the same thing. We're going to, cops are racist, defund the police. Okay, we'll get rid of cash bail. They have to. They've whipped up their base into that frenzy. Now that's resulting in high crime. Oh, no. Now regular people are like, dude, I can't live this way. So what do? Trump's evil. Trump is bad. You can't let Trump win. It's not going to work. I mean, it'll work to a certain extent. I don't know what's going to happen in November or in 2024 or in 2023 for that matter. But I can tell you there's going to be a lot of regular people who are like, don't know, don't care, economy bad, vote for the other guy. And so even though I don't blame Joe Biden for the railroad union strike, regular voters, they're not paying attention. They're going to say the economy sucks and it hurts. I'm voting for the other guy. And the Democrats won't be able to get a hold of this. I mean, Joe Biden is dumping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to try and keep prices down. Let's see how long that lasts, extracting from the system to save yourself. Sickening. But first, Let's see what's going on with the railroad union, why they're going to strike, and what this means for you. My friends, it could mean some serious shortages and economic damage. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com and become a member. If you would like to support our work as a member, you get access to exclusive segments from the Timcast IRL podcast, uncensored. Last night, we had Luke Rudkowski talking about his thoughts on September 2001. And if you're familiar with We Are Change, you know where that went. But basically, we talk about the ideas of conspiracies, and I'm not a big fan or proponent of these things, but it's an interesting, uncensored conversation that I think you should check out over at timcast.com. Again, so don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends. Let's start real quick with this headline. I do want to come back to the story. Rail strike threat squeezes Biden between unions and economic peril. I want to highlight that going into why this story matters, because that context is extremely important. The railroad union strike is like an earthquake of massive proportions for the Democrats because, as I stated, regular people might not know why the economy is bad, just that it is, and they're voting for the other guy. The National Review reports a labor union that represents U.S. railroad workers said its 4,900 members voted against a deal its leaders had reached with U.S. freight railroads. The vote comes after the union, the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, IAM, became one of 10 labor groups to tentatively agree to contract recommendations made by a nonpartisan panel appointed by President Biden, the Wall Street Journal reported. 2 other unions have yet to reach a deal, the report adds. I just love this. Biden intervening, saying, like, here's what we can do. Please don't do this to us less than 2 months from the midterms. Quote, IAM Freight rail members are skilled professionals who have worked in difficult conditions through a pandemic to make sure essential products get to their destinations, the union said in a statement on Wednesday, announcing the results of the vote. The statement adds, we look forward to continuing that vital work with a fair contract that ensures our members and their families are treated with the respect they deserve for keeping America's goods and resources moving through the pandemic. A new poll by Smart TED, one of the biggest railroad unions, reveals that 78% of its workers would reject the proposed deal. Well, my understanding is that they've already voted against it. The union says that its 4,900 members voted against its deal. And now Smart TED is saying that as well. Now, officials from both sides are set to meet Wednesday with Labor Secretary Marty Walsh as the White House aims to facilitate an agreement before Friday. If an agreement cannot be reached by Friday at 12:01 a.m., the unions have threatened to strike. Okay, maybe we will not see that strike. Why? It's just a threat. Maybe they're playing hardball. Come Friday, they'll be like, we're going to give you one last chance. That would be good news for everybody. Look, as much as I'm not a fan of Democrats, I, unlike Bill Maher, would not advocate for economic damage to your life simply because I don't like a political party. If Biden can effectively navigate this and actually prevent this, good for him. I will give respect where respect is due. Well, the meeting occurs in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday. Republicans plan to introduce a bill by Senators Roger Wicker of Mississippi and Richard Burr of North Carolina that would require both sides to accept the contract recommendations made by the presidential panel in order to avoid a crippling shutdown of U.S. freight railways. It looks like we got a bipartisan effort here to prevent this because it would hurt everybody. At issue is a points-based attendance policy for conductors and engineers that union leaders say punish workers for missing work for routine doctor's visits and family medical emergencies. The 2 largest unions have said their members will not agree to a deal that does not address the issue, and the railroads have not shown a willingness to change the policy. The Republican legislation, which would only force both sides to adopt the board recommendations in the event that an agreement is not reached by Friday, the Friday deadline, may have difficulty advancing in Congress, as it's unclear whether Democrats would support the measure. I'd be surprised if they don't, because they desperately need to make sure this strike doesn't happen. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said Tuesday that he believes both sides should agree to the board's recommendations. The president's board has made a recommendation as to how this should be settled. And unless Biden changed his position, the president apparently supports the position of the presidential board, McConnell said. That seems to me to be the perfect place to get the strike settled. Now, that'd be good news. Let's be real. No one should be wishing for a strike for several reasons. One, I want the workers to get what they're owed and have a good contract. I am much more in favor of the workers than I am the big corporations. Not a big fan of laissez-faire capitalism. I like collective bargaining. Not a big fan of unions based on the laws that have been passed, but I want to see the workers get what they're owed. I think the regular working class folks are those who deserve to be well compensated. Now, often we see when it comes to workforce collective bargaining, you do have to understand the position of management and the company. It's not always so simple. The left wants to paint a picture that these corporations are just greedy and want to burn everything to the ground, steal as much resources as possible, and that's not always true. So it is tough. Sometimes the negotiations don't work. When I worked at Fusion, I remember after I left, Fusion was the ABC News Univision joint venture. I had friends, so I'm not working there anymore, and they were talking about unionizing. And I said to my friend, you do realize that it's an investment property that generates no revenue, right? And they're like, I don't know what that means. And I'm like, okay, the company you work for has no income. So going to the parent company and saying, just give us more of your money won't work. They'll just terminate the project. And they were like, I don't know what you're talking about, but we deserve it. And I'm like, okay. And then mass layoffs occurred. The company basically said that you don't make money. There's no point continuing this. Y'all are entitled. We're done. I think they fired like 300 people or something. Yeah, it sucks that it happened. People got to understand how investment properties work. Not every project, every company is making money. Some people are hoping that a project can work and it doesn't always work out. But either way, we don't want the strike to happen because we want the workers to have a good life. We don't want the strike to happen because we want regular people to get the goods they need. It would be collateral damage for everybody. And I personally do not accept the idea that the American people and the workers of this railroad union should suffer so that we can make Joe Biden look bad. Not interested. I am strongly encouraging Joe Biden to do his best for the Democrats and Walsh to succeed in this endeavor. Please, guys, I'm wishing you the best, and I'm genuinely hoping you can solve this before it gets bad. We want the economy to be better. You know, I want Joe Biden's plans to work. I just think that they don't. I think we've seen for a variety of reasons the economy suffering, and it comes from Republicans and Democrats alike. Donald Trump was the president in 2020. He had a lot of spending. These policy changes we saw were under his watch. He's far from perfect man. But we did see pre-pandemic the best numbers of our lives. That's good news for everybody. I can't tell you how many people I talked to, contractors, a furniture saleswoman saying they made more money in 2019 than they'd ever made. It was amazing. And that was because Donald Trump's a businessman. It's good news. I want Joe Biden to do well as well. I don't like him. I'll vote against him. But look, the end result is this. Despite all the bad things that are happening, if we can get the job done and help the American people, that's what needs to happen. And then come November, I'll vote for somebody else. But if people want to support them because they did a good job, well, then that's why they should support them. Bloomberg reports the Biden administration is pressuring labor unions and freight rail operators to agree to a new contract before a Friday deadline to avert a strike. Biden has been briefed on the matter and is closely tracking the work of cabinet officials. Labor Secretary Marty Walsh on Sunday evening again pressed the parties to reach a resolution. We get it. A strike would carry significant political risk for Biden and his fellow Democrats, whose efforts to hang on to their House and Senate majorities in the November 8th election have been boosted by a string of legislative victories and improving economic news. Supply chain disruptions less than 2 months before voters go to the polls could hurt Democrats and put Biden, who has pledged to be the most pro-union president in history, in a bind. While 10 of 12 railroad workers unions have struck new labor deals, the two holdouts, the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen and the International Association of Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers, account for more than 90,000 rail employees. Railroads have advised customers of some potential service disruptions starting on Monday if talks don't progress ahead of a potential walkout on September 17th. 6 Class 1 freight railroads will begin to take steps to manage and secure shipments of some hazardous or sensitive materials starting Monday, the Association of American Railroads, a trade group, said in a statement. A work stoppage also could hamper food shipments and would come at a particularly perilous time, said Brooke Appleton, vice president of public policy at the National Corn Growers Association. Rail is an essential piece of the agricultural supply chain, particularly as we approach harvest season. So any disruption to rail services would have a negative and lasting impact on our growers. Given what is at stake for the agricultural community and other sectors of the economy, we hope all parties will come to an agreement. I'm going to say it again. I completely agree, man. The U.S. government is making contingencies if the rail shutdown occurs. This is from just the other day from Reuters last night. Biden's administration on Tuesday made contingency plans aiming to ensure deliveries of critical goods in the event of a shutdown of the U.S. rail system, while pressing railroads and unions to reach a deal to avoid a work stoppage affecting freight and passenger service. The potential shutdown, which would come as early as Friday, could freeze almost 30% of U.S. cargo shipments, stoke inflation, impede supply of food and fuel, and cost the economy about $2 billion per day. Brutal, man. Yeah, look, I got mad respect for the efforts of the Biden administration and the Democratic admin officials that are working to prevent this from occurring. I still think it is likely to happen. I do. I don't know. I can't see the future. I'm just being a bit pessimistic based on what we've seen from the Biden administration and the failures in the economy. I'm not sure they're going to be able to pull this one off. I don't think they're competent. That's just the reality. I think there's very real concerns about the weaponization of the DOJ and the Democrats going after Trump supporters. I think it's nightmarish. I think no matter what happens, no matter what their efforts are, I'm poised to vote against them because of their overreach. But I have to at least say, whoever, please help the workers and the American people to prevent something like this. My fingers are crossed. But you want to know the truth? I think the Democrats have been actively working against the American people. I think they've been working to ship our jobs overseas. I think the Republicans have too, but the MAGA Republicans haven't, and that's the split in the Republican Party. They've been sending our jobs to China, our manufacturing to China. They've been sending our jobs to Mexico and to other countries, to Vietnam, to Bangladesh or whatever. Wherever it is they're making clothes. I think they do Bangladesh and like Vietnam and Cambodia and stuff. So I'm not convinced. I think Donald Trump, for all his faults, was trying to bring jobs back. They go on to mention that last Tuesday they were planning on hosting these individuals, so we know this is happening. The Biden administration's push, let me read. If the agreements are not reached, there could be union strikes, but the railroads and unions could also agree to stay at the bargaining table. So it's possible they don't come to an agreement, but they still avoid this. The White House has told railroads and unions that a shutdown is unacceptable and will hurt American workers, families, and businesses, and they must take action to avert it. One key issue is ensuring continued distribution of vital hazardous materials. So we read all this. We understand this. All of this is happening as the Dow books near 1,300 point drop as stocks record worst day since June 2020, since the start of the pandemic. Yo, it's so brutal. Everybody's trying to come out and say it's not Joe Biden's fault. Come on. Dude, he's the guy in charge. It was Trump's fault in 2020 when all this was going down because the buck stops with him. I don't mean to say every single thing is his fault. That's silly, but he was the leader and we suffered hardship. And it's not always the fault in the sense that Donald Trump literally flicked a switch and caused damage, though he did keep Fauci on board, as well as many others. The reality is that when you are in charge and steering the ship, the buck stops with you. And right now, Joe Biden is in charge. And we have seen many policies enacted that people warned would result in inflation. Remember when the Democrats were giving out those stimulus checks and everyone was like, okay, we have to stop this. Yeah, it was Democratic governors. And I got to be honest, there's an overlap between 2020 and 2021, Trump and Biden. Let's not forget that. But right now, the mantle was handed off to Joe Biden, and it's not improved. In fact, when you take a look at the metrics, it is right following the inauguration of Joe Biden and his executive orders that inflation skyrockets, that wages collapse. So don't tell me. You know, Joe Biden's targeted the energy sector for climate change reasons. That has a direct impact on the economy. The available energy for production, it went down. The dude got us involved in more war already. And he's sending tons of money to Ukraine. All of that affects inflation. Now we're looking at $600 billion in student loan forgiveness. All of it. Inflation. And then you're going to end up with railroad workers who are like, hey, my salary doesn't pay my bills anymore. I need a raise. And the freight says, we are not making that much more money from the delivery, so we can't do it. Strike. And it all comes crashing. Politico. Republicans scramble for leverage as Biden seeks to avert rail strike. Supply chain disruptions from crops to water to energy could be devastating if freight rail unions strike as soon as Friday. That's true. The Republicans would be foolish to ignore such a great opportunity to go after the Democrats. I'm not here to play this game, man. I am worried that people will be hurt by this. Scary thought. We had a super chat the other night where a man said, it's scary to him that no matter how much he preps as a type 1 diabetic, he will not survive the collapse. Scary thought. My only advice is to get a degree in veterinary medicine and learn how to harvest insulin from pigs, and then have a lot of pigs ready. Because I think that's where they harvest the insulin from pigs. I don't know how to do it. I don't know if you actually can do it that way. So make sure you go to college, get a degree, and get certified before doing anything like that. And don't take medical advice from me. But that got me thinking, especially with this, there are a lot of people that are extremely dependent. Their lives, their actual lives depend on these things not being disrupted. You know, if the power goes out, insulin can spoil. And that's bad news for diabetics. And that's just one example of people who really rely on these supply chains. So hopefully it doesn't happen. But while Republicans are looking at leverage, there is something else. In this chart from the Daily Mail, crime, guns, and economy, top issues for midterm voters. Well, this is simple. The economy is number one. That's why the rail strike is so important. Gun policy followed by violent crime. But gun policy overlaps with violent crime. You see, let me tell you, I assure you, regular people are not concerned with just a gun. They're concerned with the fact that guns are used in crimes. If there was zero gun crime, there would be no issue of gun control or gun policy. The issue is we are seeing murders, violence, robbery, and it's sad and it's horrifying. And people are experiencing it. The Daily Mail reports, how safe is your city? Robberies soar by 13% and aggravated assaults by 2.6% in big U.S. cities so far this year. Concern over violent crime is set to drive voter turnout in the midterms. Violent crime rates grew by 4.4% in major cities in the first half of 2022. This was largely down to rises in robberies and aggravated assaults. Aggravated means typically that the assault was made with a deadly weapon. And assault doesn't always mean you actually physically harmed someone. In Illinois, for instance, if you brandish a firearm in someone's face, I'm pretty sure that's aggravated assault. Assault in Illinois is putting someone in reasonable fear of harm. So if you swing at someone and miss, you've assaulted them. If you lunge at someone, you've assaulted them. I know it's weird, right? Aggravated, though, means a deadly weapon or extreme force that could result in death. Homicide rates dipped slightly, but have remained elevated since the pandemic spike. Atlanta, New Orleans, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Dallas, Phoenix, and Denver all saw more murders this year. New York City recorded a 39% rise in robberies and a 21% rise in aggravated assaults. 60% of voters say crime will impact their ballot in the upcoming midterms. So here we go. Our good friends over at Media Matters. Ah, yes, Media Matters. They write, Tucker Carlson told Republicans to focus on crime. They're listening. Are they? Fox News host Tucker Carlson offered Republicans some campaign advice last month as the party's push to win back control of the U.S. House and Senate appeared to falter. If every Republican office seeker, every Republican candidate in the U.S. focused on law and order and equality under the law, there would be a red wave in the November midterm elections, Carlson declared. I agree. They go on to say 1 month later, Republican strategy appears to have fallen in line with Carlson's suggestion. GOP officials have been mixing up their advertising spending with a new focus on issues like crime. I don't think it's just Tucker Carlson. I think polling institutions have said this, and it took them a month to figure it out. Tucker is not guiding them. I love this one. Once again, from Media Matters, Tucker Carlson claims that George Soros is funding the collapse of civilization. I mean, that's his opinion. He's allowed to have it. Carlson said, how did this happen? Well, there are many threads, but George Soros is a big one. Soros paid for this. And then they just quote Tucker Carlson. He says, in Chicago right now, taxpayers are more likely to be the victims of crime than criminals are to be punished for it. So the question is, why would anyone in Chicago pay taxes? You'd have to be a masochist to do that. And pretty soon, only the masochists will be. So how did this happen? Well, it's no mystery there are many threads, but George Soros is a big one. Soros paid for this to happen. Soros backed a prosecutor, Kim Foxx, who turned Chicago over to the most vicious people who live there. Not the decent, good people in all neighborhoods. The most vicious. The ones who truly don't care about others, who want to kill people for their shoes or their car. The worst people. And they run things now. I can only imagine that's how Tucker Carlson said it, but that's the quote. Media Matter is saying this. Why? Are they claiming it's not true? From the Wall Street Journal opinion section. Why I support reform prosecutors. Justice or safety? It's a false choice. They reinforce each other. Now, George Soros wrote a long op-ed about why he's standing by and defending his decision. He says, we spend $81 billion every year keeping around 2 million people in prisons and jails. We need to invest more in preventing crime with strategies that will work, deploying mental health professionals in crisis situations, investing in youth jobs programs, and creating opportunities for education behind bars. This reduces the likelihood that those prisoners will commit new crimes after release. Spot on. I completely agree with the paragraph written here by Mr. George Soros. The problem is execution. That's not what's happening. You are funding people who are burning it all to the ground. At a certain point, maybe you'd be like, okay, we tried it. It didn't work. Let's slow down a little bit. But no. Full speed ahead. Full steam ahead. Ah, yes, I love that phrase, full steam. Back in the day when we shoveled coals into an engine to create steam that would then create, rotational force or piston force to drive a wheel. It's good fun. The Examiner says Illinois eager to join Democrats' pro-crime experiment. They mention New York. They mention San Francisco. They mention Washington State. And then another shoe is about to drop in Illinois. Thanks to Democrats' 2021 passage of the SAFE-T Act. Oh, very clever. Many provisions of which go into effect this coming January. Unless this law is fixed, the bill will abolish cash bail for nearly all defendants, bar police from removing trespassers from homes and businesses, and give bail jumpers a 48-hour head start before the police can even start trying to track them down. Criminal coddling policies are having serious political consequences for Democrats in other states. Much more importantly, they're having tragic, life-altering, and life-ending consequences for the innocent victims of the criminals whom these policies seem almost designed to enable. Chicago, always a dangerous city, is always a dangerous city, but in 2022, quite possibly the mecca of murder, could yet become much worse than it is now. Believe it or not, thanks to Illinois Democrats, we might soon find out just how bad. Meanwhile, since 2010, Illinois has lost almost as many residents, 160,000, as live in its second largest city, Aurora. We can't imagine why. Really? Aurora is the second largest city in Illinois? That's weird. Aurora is basically a northwestern suburb of Chicago, so it's all the Chicagoland area. Whatever. But yeah, man, it's happening. Shooting inside Chicago's Washington Park during a baseball game leaves at least one person dead and 7 hospitalized as Windy City reels from violent crime. Lunatic progressives who turned San Francisco into a fentanyl-ravaged hellhole are now begging for ideas to save the city. But here's a ludicrous catch, reveals David Marcus. You can't arrest anyone. Police. Armed man wearing clown wig said he wanted to kill all Democrats. Please stop. But this guy's clearly unwell. Tucker Carlson talked about a story. A man in Bucktown in Chicago. It was interesting to hear his segment because I once lived in Bucktown. Bucktown is very nice. They have a skate park just around a corner from Bucktown, the Logan Park skate park. And it's where all the hipsters were living. And it's where many of them remained, and the neighborhood was gentrifying, and now it's getting dangerous. And it's getting violent. And it's sad to see. Chicago has always been corrupt. So this Kim Fox thing doesn't really surprise me. Jussie Smollett almost got away with this crime. The cops still went after him. But Chicago's corrupt. It's always been corrupt. I don't know it as anything else. I know it as police detaining people in what's called a black site, an unmarked location. We know about the stories of Chicago cops electrocuting people with tasers to force confessions. What was that guy's name? I can't remember that guy's name. But yeah, Chicago ain't a good place. Now, crime is through the roof. It's crazy. You have all these gangs in Chicago. I remember seeing maps in local police stations showing you all the gang territory, and they'd keep up to date on who controlled what. And it's just crazy. The cops are just another gang, just the biggest one. And I mean that because, well, look, I've seen good cops in Chicago. The cops one cop grabbed a meter maid by the throat and slammed her up against the wall and lifted her up because she gave him a ticket. He parked illegally. She walked by, looked around. She's like, I don't know, you can't park here, and gave him a ticket. So he came out, grabbed her by the throat and slammed her up against the wall. There was another video where off-duty cops brutally beat a female bartender because they're basically their own gang. I'm not a fan of Chicago police, but I will tell you, police reform is the solution, not abolition of police, not the curtailing of policy. The policy is being enacted improperly because of cultural issues. If people had scruples and said, I'm not going to do this, then maybe they would not. But these cops don't care. They get away with it. You need to change the culture. The policies like cash bail ain't the issue. Now, I'm no fan of cash bail. The idea that you can be held when innocent because you're not proven guilty, but we have due process and we have a bail hearing. The system is just breaking down. It needs to be fixed. Crime in the economy, ladies and gentlemen, that's what's going to be driving people this November. And while the polls are showing that Democrats are making major gains, you need to understand that the railroad strike, collapsing economy, and crime are going to drive people, and they ain't voting for Democrats if they go out and vote. So y'all need to go knock on doors. Are you a conservative in Chicago? Knock on doors. You don't even got to tell people to vote Republican. Just complain about Democrat policy. Or at the very least, ask them if they'd be willing to consider it. Register your neighbors to vote. Have local meetings. Find your moderate candidate to vote against these people. You can win. The change has got to come from you, man. We got to stand up. We got to push back. We got to say enough. We won't stand for this stuff. Otherwise, you're going to see a worsening economy. You're going to see escalating crime. Register your neighbors to vote. Call your friends and family. Make sure they're registered to vote. Scott Pressler, I shout him out every time because he's the man going out and registering people to vote, helping flip states. I think Florida typically had more registered Democrats than Republicans. It flipped I think almost a year ago now. Now it's got more Republicans. And that's thanks to individuals who are going out and registering people to vote. I think we must avoid the pitfalls of mocking Biden and wishing for his failure. I want him to stop doing the bad things and focus on the good things. And I think we should go out and tell people, look, the Democrats and Republicans are both trying to stop this strike. Respect to both parties. But in the end, we have to ask ourselves, how do we get to a point where the economy was so bad? It wasn't Donald Trump. Under Donald Trump, we had the best numbers of our lives. Look it up. That quote from, Jim Cramer. That was the quote. We can bring that back, but we gotta vote for accountability. And we got to say enough to the failed policies. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimcastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.